Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Wonderful Wednesdays with Wendy. I am your host, Wendy Wotecki. Today we have Cindy from the PEAL Center here, and she's going to discuss some really important topics with us. She is going to talk about compensatory services, COVID compensatory services, compensatory education, extended school year, and what all those definitions are, what it means, how it pertains to you, where they get the data from all this stuff, how to decide if you get it or don't get it, how you are supposed to have a hand in deciding this as well, and what it all means and what your rights and your responsibilities are regarding this hotbed of a mess that we have in front of us. So welcome, Cindy.
Thanks, Wendy. It's always nice to be here with you.
You are one of my favorite people. I always say I'm going to be Cindy when I grow up because she has such extensive knowledge when it comes to special education and the laws and what's going on. And if she doesn't know, she knows where to look. And so you are such an asset to me, and I appreciate you being here.
Oh, thanks.
So what we're going to talk about today is COVID compensatory services. Let's start right in the hot topic, the hot seat. What is COVID compensatory service?
So, you're not going to find this in IDEA. This is something that all states are calling it something different. And historically, there's nothing like this. So this is the term that the Pennsylvania Department of Ed, Bureau of Special Education, came up with to kind of describe what is going to be available for students who have IEPs and who have really suffered from regression during the time of COVID, all the way back, hard to believe it's been a year, but all the way back last March until now, and how that's going to be made up and what that's going to look like. And again, it's going to have to be individualized for every student. So this is going to be, there's nothing right now as far as formulas for how to come up with this or what it's going to look like for each student. There has been some guidance that we've got from Pennsylvania Department of Ed, and we can definitely share that with folks. It helps, but also it's a little vague. So school districts are really struggling with, what's this going to look like for their students and how are they going to provide this to their students? As far as, there have been funds made available to schools to help them provide these services to students. So, it shouldn't be something that we worry about. What we should worry about is getting a free, appropriate public education for our kids.
So I know schools are calling it CCS services because, they like to use their little acronyms and talk over our heads. So if they're talking CCS, that is going to be your COVID compensatory services. And right now, a lot of schools are liking to just send little notes home to you saying your child doesn't qualify. Is that an appropriate thing for them to be doing?
Great question, Wendy, because we are seeing this throughout the state. The PEAL Center serves the state, so we're seeing this, and it's not appropriate. At every point when there's decision-making to be done for the student, we should be looking to the IEP team, of which parents are an equal partner. So as far as everything that goes into determining COVID compensatory services or CCS for a student should include the parent. If you do get one of these letters that's making the unilateral statement that your child doesn't qualify, I would call for an IEP meeting and, it's to have this discussion with your IEP team.
So when you're having a discussion with the IEP team, though, what data, according to the guidance, because here's the parents have no idea. So they're just listening to what the school has to say. And I know I have a parent on here right now that is highly invested in this. How do we know what data they're using to say you don't you didn't earn this CCS service.
Well, let's face it, all kids, whether you have an IEP or not, and I say this very generally, but the fact is the majority of students have regressed. There has been regression that has occurred. This isn't normal for any of us, and it's a pretty sure thing. The data that's used, there's been, and this is probably, one of the first things that should be mentioned is nothing in IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, has been waived. So anything that was in the IEP pre-COVID, all that stuff that was the description of free appropriate public education, or FAPE, for your child. So all of those things, nothing has been waived according to IDEA. So what we're looking at is the fact that they should have been receiving all those things. Now, because of COVID, and we recognize this is not something that districts could have prevented in any way. So we're not saying, oh, these COVID compensatory services are in place because they did something wrong. It's not. It's just the fact that COVID is in place, and this is something that, we have to provide for, with the understanding that nothing has been waived. The schools should have all been taking data from the time that we closed the buildings and that we came, started again in January, and, we're in asynchronous or synchronous learning. All of that time, data should have been being collected. There's no reason it shouldn't have been collected. I am seeing sometimes now that schools are saying, we weren't able to collect data because of COVID. And COVID is not a reason not to have collected data. So they have to have data from last year to be able to compare it to this year. And that's what's in the frequently asked questions that came from PDE, comparing that data. So them not having data isn't a reason to decline or reject CCS for your student. So when we talk about data that is being used for CCS, we are looking at data that was taken, from last March on IEP goals that were in place there. We're looking for, testing that has been done, information like that. But most importantly, for kids who have had a majority of their education at home throughout this time and may not just now be getting back, parents are the ones that have the data that, while the kids have been at home, that the schools don't have. So any information that you have, that you've seen for your child, should be shared with your IEP team regarding the regression or the difficulty they've had getting those skills back, whether it was academic, social, behavioral. Be sure to, we said this early on, that if you have a calendar and you can write down, oh, he had a really bad day, wasn't able to sign on to the computer. Whatever it is, write down that information and share it with the IEP team.
That's what I was going to ask. What kind of data specifically are you as a parent supposed to be collecting? And then the data that the school's collecting, if a parent calls up and wants it because of it being for CCS services, are they supposed to provide that to you if you ask for it? Can they provide that to you, or do they not have to?
Great question, because what that really goes to is the right to be a fully informed decision maker, which under IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, we as parents have a right to be a fully informed decision maker. That means any of that information that we need to make these decisions, we need to have. So yes, we're entitled to all of that data, all of those progress reports, anything that we need to make decisions regarding our child, we are entitled to have under IDEA. By the same token, this information that we're collecting at home, it's not going to look the same as it does, when schools take it. There might be tallies and lots of numbers. Our narrative data is just as important. It was really hard for for my child to hear the teacher today when he was doing the asynchronous learning. It was very difficult for him to follow along. This is all information that we should be sharing with our IEP team. And I think what's important to remember is that, this isn't education at home. This is still public education. It just so happens that the environment that the kids are learning in now is home. So the school still has responsibility for the difficulties that a child's having in this different environment. It's not a classroom environment. It is a home environment, but they're still receiving public education. And with nothing being waived, there are still expectations that the public schools have to provide for our kids.
Okay. So say you're in that IEP meeting and you're talking about the CCS services because it has to be discussed. And they are saying, at this time, your student does not qualify. What happens now? Because as a parent, you know that they are not where they need to be. You know that there was a significant backslide, and their excuse is everybody backslid. So everybody's in the same boat, because that's what I'm hearing. Everybody's there. You're fine. You're not no greater percentile than anybody else as far as data, because they always reference this data, and then the data is a mystery to the parent because the parent didn't ask for the data and I didn't ask for the data. So they say you're not eligible. What next?
Well, and this is why it's supposed to be a team decision. You have to have time to digest and to understand that data. So if there's anything you don't understand, this isn't the time to be shy about asking questions. Ask questions about the data they have. Be sure to have shared the data that you have. And I say data. This is really, if you have an email that you send to the teacher that says, we were having a really tough time today, that's data right there. Mm-hmm. So share that information with them. If, the school has told you your child's not eligible, I think one of the most important things to remember here, again, nothing has been waived in IDEA. So anything that the child has not received regarding their free appropriate public education, which again, we look, for that baseline of our free appropriate public education for our child, we're looking at that IEP that was in place pre-COVID. Mm-hmm. And anything that hasn't been provided, compensatory education, which is what's provided to a student when the school fails to provide free appropriate public education to a child, is still in place. So COVID compensatory is something that that the state came up with to try and, remedy the fact that things have been lost during COVID. But compensatory education, which is make-up education for when the school has not provided FAPE, is still able to be received by a student when the school hasn't provided that themselves. So just because a student might not be eligible for CCS, this might be an opportunity for the parent to say, well, then we're going to seek compensatory education. And it's not that, the makeup education might look the same, might look similar to whatever would have been appropriate for CCS. But the fact is, compensatory education, as it's written in the law, has not been taken away. And this is still something parents can seek for their child.
So what's the difference? So compensatory services have always been there. And I think that being a parent connector, an advocate, those are really hard to go after, because you kind of have to prove that somewhere something didn't connect and went wrong. So the difference between compensatory services and COVID compensatory services would be what? I mean, what's the...
Well, in COVID compensatory services, all we're looking at really is regression and recoupment.
Okay.
Again, if you refer back to the frequently asked questions, which we'll send, we can send out a link to that if we haven't done that already. But if you look at that, it's only based on regression and recoupment. Compensatory education is going to be based on the fact that the school didn't provide free appropriate public education to the child. So if that was because of compliance, let's say that the child's IEP said that they're going to get 1 week or 1 hour of speech a week. And because of COVID, that didn't happen. But they're saying, oh, he's caught up fine. He's doing just great. You can seek those services via a state complaint, which parents don't be scared of a state complaint. This isn't meant to be a gotcha or something that's sneaky or anything. This is letting the district know that they need to improve programming. And that if a student who in their IEP, again, a legally binding document, there was the understanding of the team that the child was going to get 1 hour a week, and because of COVID didn't, but the school's saying he caught up, but you're still entitled to what was not received.
Okay.
So you can request through the complaint form compensatory education as a resolution.
Okay, so then it's not a COVID compensatory issue, even though they didn't get that speech because of COVID. It is just a regular compensatory education issue because they did not get what they were supposed to get in the IEP. Mm-hmm. Through no fault of anybody's. It's nobody's fault, but you as a parent have that right to seek that for your child. Excellent. Mm-hmm. All right. So when would the school they say, yes, you're entitled to compensatory service or COVID compensatory service? When would the school provide that? Because that's a really interesting question too, because I've heard many different scenarios here. So what is the real deal? When are they supposed to provide you with your CCS services?
Well, this is going to have to be, the IEP team should talk about it. But the one time when they're not going to provide it is, when the child's getting instruction under their IEP during the school day. That shouldn't necessarily be happening. It's not in place to supplant their instructional day. It's not there to take the place of their instructional day. This is being provided over and on top of that because something was missing. So, it can be provided weekends, after school, before school. And, we've even heard, from PDE that summer may be a time for kids to have COVID compensatory services offered to be able to make up for everything that's been missed.
Okay, so when you say summertime, we are also dealing with something called extended school year. So extended school year, can you explain real quickly, what qualifies for you for extended school year versus compensatory services or COVID compensatory services? Extended school year is based on what?
And this is where it gets really, really blurry. So extended school year, that's, anything that goes over and above the school day, is based on, there's 7 criteria for extended school year, of which regression and recoupment take up about 3 of those, and regression and or recoupment, or both of those things together. But there's 4 other criteria for extended school year. And CCS and ESY aren't interchangeable. Those are 2 different things for 2 different purposes. CCS is to make up for things that were lost where the school should have been providing services. Extended school year is in order to maintain skills. It's not to make progress in skills, it's to maintain skills so that when the kids go back, whether it's, at the end of a long break or it's, at the end of the summer break, so that they do have those skills that they had when they left school, and that long break didn't mean that they lost or had trouble recouping any of the skills that they did have. And again, there's 7 criteria for extended school year, so there's other reasons for extended school year. But I have heard that some school districts now are planning on kind of meshing the 2. And as a parent, you're going to have to decide, is this okay for my child to, have the school say, well, extended school year is going to be 9 to 3, and then CCS is going to be from or 9 to 12, and then, CCS is going to be from 12 to 3. Is that appropriate for your own child?
Right. I've heard a lot of that. And then I have also heard a lot of they are doing extended school year data based off of Christmas break retention. And that was it, because that's when they had data, that the schools had concrete data from before Christmas. You had a break and to see where the child is directly after Christmas. And if the weeks after Christmas, the 2 weeks after Christmas data showed backslide and no retention, that's the only way that they were basing extended school year. Is that supposed to be happening like that?
Well, again, there is, and this is something else that we can provide to the families. There's extended school year booklet that PDE puts out that gives you a list of what would be considered data for extended school year. And it's not just those things regarding regression and recoupment. Again, we're looking at, because the kids have been home for a lot in different school districts for a lot of time, we want the parents' input on this. What did you see? Did you see a lot of regression? Did you see a lot of trouble with recoupment? Did the child withdraw from the learning process? Because that is one of the criteria for extended school year. Was the child at a critical point in learning a skill, and then because of a break would lose that skill? Again, that's for extended school year. So, again, parents, share that information about, being on extended break and what that means for your child as an individual student, and how that break, it's, it's made worse than by COVID, but the services that are going to be provided by the school regarding ESY and CCS are two different things.
Which brings us into the next hot spot, which is those schools offering their own CCS programs, but is it appropriate for your child?
This is tough because, parents are being told, well, this is the program that we have, as if there's no other options. But we're talking about individual students with unique needs. And they can say that they have a program, and they can say that this is going to address the issues around CCS, but is it going to address it for this particular student who might have, multiple disabilities, was unable to engage with in virtual learning, had great difficulty engaging in virtual learning? It might not be the same as, the needs might not be the same as an individual who, did some backslide on reading because he wasn't exposed to reading as much, or, whatever the differences are in the kid's own circumstances. That program just might not be appropriate. And again, we are talking about individual needs. So it is something that has to be discussed by the team, but again, not a time for a parent or a family member to be shy about asserting what their rights are, and that is that this program might not be appropriate for my student.
Right, and that's where, fortunately, you can reach out. The PEAL Center is statewide. Mission and Power is Erie County. We have staff available to help you go into those meetings and ask those hard questions. The schools are really trying to do their best right now. I don't think that they are out to harm anybody whatsoever, but if it's not working for you individually as a family, then you need to be heard, right? So what are your final words on this? Because this is just such a humongous hot topic.
I guess it would be as it is with other things. You don't have to know all the ins and outs, but know where to go to get the answers. That's what Wendy's for. That's what we're for. That's why we want to provide these resources to you. Just know where to get the answers.
In the beginning, she spoke about having the right to know how they came about the data. And she mentioned something, and I was trying to write it down, but I didn't get it, which she said that you are a certain thing, and that's the reason why you need to have informed information. What was that word she used?
A fully informed decision maker. We know that all the teachers, they have the information they need to make decisions coming to the IEP team. The principal, he has information, that person has information they need coming into an IEP meeting. As parents, we're entitled to be fully informed decision makers. That means anything we need to know that would help us to make a decision for our child, we're entitled to. So if that means data from the school, if it means information about programs that are available for our child that would be specific to their needs, we need to know those things. So that was the term, fully informed decision maker.
And my next question is that if the parent had on their IEP that they're supposed to have direct speech, and now they're having tele speech or over the internet speech, and the parent prefer that the person come to the home, does that mean that they get compensated if they don't do, what can the mother do in that case?
Sure. So what we want to talk about is not really what our preferences are, but we want to frame it in what are the needs of the child, because this is all about the child and what their needs are because of disability. So if the child responds better or responds positively when it's in person and one-on-one, then we can advocate for that to happen. If the child has trouble getting engaged through teleservices or doesn't like to sit in front of the computer and can't access that service because they can't stay on task, then that's a reason to say to the IEP team, they need to have one-on-one in-person services because they aren't getting appropriate services the way that they're being provided through the telehealth.
And then my last question is that parents are not teachers. They're not para. They're just parents. But it appears as if that now they want us to be para, and don't provide us with a para to give instruction to our kid when they do it over the internet.
Right. And so this is another, there was some guidance that came up from the Department of Ed regarding this. And what we want to do as parents is take a look at the IEP that was in place pre-COVID. So the IEP that was in place, let's say last February. And if that IEP included paraprofessional, either in person or one-on-one or instructional, then the IEP team should have considered that when we went to virtual learning. Just because education is now happening in the home and not in the school, like I said earlier, the school still has a responsibility to the needs of that child. So if that was something that was in the IEP in February, the team should be considering, well, what are the needs of the child now, and how will that be provided to the student? So that's, that then goes to the right of the child to, of the parent to be able to advocate for that. But there are some students who, because they've been put into this virtual environment, are having more difficulty than they would in school. Advocacy here might take a little, might be a little more intense, but some students are having greater difficulty at the home environment and may need that one-on-one. So that's, again, something that you're going to have to bring it up to the team. We're going to have to talk about it. But let's look, too, at what was provided in the past to make sure that free appropriate public education was in place for the child. And if it included paraprofessional, then it shouldn't be including that. It should be including the paraprofessional now, too.
Thank you.
Sure, Paula.
Okay, does anybody else have a question for Cindy? She is absolutely the expert, and she's here. So she's like, I'm not an expert, but I know where to find the answer. So I didn't know if anybody else had a question for her regarding this topic.
So my question is regarding our rights as parents to have our children at grade level. My school, I do want to say, have been very, they've been very good about responding to me and providing me with data and information that shows there is a progress, although it is very small. And what I'm what I keep getting from the school is that we're showing that there is progress and a forward momentum. So regardless of the fact that we're below where grade level, where she should be, because there's progress, my argument is if I had more assistance and there was more time in the special ed environment, we might be able to become at grade level. And then we keep getting, well, we're meeting her where she's at. And I understand that we have to meet her where she's at, but if we bridge that gap with more services, I feel that not only could we meet where she's at, but we could get her where she needs to be. Because I feel like if we continue on the current trajectory, we're always going to be behind the 8 ball. Everybody has been lovely to deal with, but I can't seem to get over that barrier. Is there anything I have as a right, as a parent, to say, I want my child at grade level, and I what are my rights in that regard?
So, you know, all of the, you know, our kids are entitled to the gen ed, to be receiving the gen ed curriculum, and that's at grade level. And then it's understood that that grade level material will be modified to meet the needs of our child. And if families haven't heard of the Andrew case, this was a Supreme Court case that put more rights, gave more rights to our kids regarding progress and what we should expect from the schools. So the main gist of Andrew was it required schools to provide students an education that is, now this is the key part, reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress in light of the child's circumstances. So, you know, taking into consideration each child's circumstances, we have to decide as a team, well, what's that going to look like for this individual student? And that's up to the IEP team to do that. So when we think about that, then we have to think about, well, how's that going to be provided to the student? And, you know, there is a lot of evidence, and this is what we rely on a lot in special education, is research-based, evidence-based. Evidence shows that being pulled out isn't necessarily going to provide the student with more progress. What needs to happen is that the student needs to have that curriculum appropriately modified so that it is teaching them what they need to learn. And that can happen anywhere. So it's not exactly the pull-out part that's going to ensure progress, but what accommodations are being provided, what supports are being provided to the student. So that's kind of something that the team wants to take a look at. If you've never heard of the Supplemental Aids and Services Toolkit, this is something that the IEP team would definitely want to take a look at to ensure that anything that the student needs where they are is being provided to them. And the toolkit, it's not an IEP meeting. So what the toolkit's going to do is have the team focus on what are the needs of this student and how are we best going to meet those needs in the environment that the child's in. So that's all that the IEP, or that the Supplementary Aids and Services Toolkit does, is take a real intense look at what are the needs of the student, what can be provided that might not be being provided to the student right now. And this is available. It was developed by Patton. It's we use a trained facilitator to be able to provide this to an IEP team, and that trained facilitator could be either somebody from the school or someone from Patton or usually the IU. We look to the IU before we look to Patton for assistance in that facilitation. But you know, it's important for the majority of our kids to you know, have that grade level curriculum and be exposed to that and get that information, because that's what's going to take them to grade level and ensure that they're able to make progress. We look at every other student who's in that school making a year's worth of progress and say, well, my child should be making progress. They should be challenged. And a lot of times that's what's happening, is our kids aren't appropriately challenged. And because they're not appropriately challenged, they're not even exposed to that grade level material. So let's expose them to that grade level material and give them the supports that they need to be able to learn that material. I hope that makes sense, Lauren.
It does. And but I guess what I'm trying to say is, so they are doing that. But at the end of the day, because we're showing progress and they're doing all of those things, can I then say, I want more so that she can be caught up, if you will? And it seems like I don't have that authority or right, because they're doing everything within the school day. So I don't know if that means then, can I can I just request extended school year on my own, or again, do we have to qualify for it? Because it seems like whenever the qualifying piece comes up, we don't meet the qualifications because we are making progress, because incrementally she is progressing, and she is progressing at the same, I guess there is some level of regression, if you will, but since all students are somewhat regressed, it's not something that says, okay, she is regressing more than the norm, so thereby she is eligible. So I guess my question really is, does everything have to be data driven? Can anything just be parent driven and saying, you know what, my child, I feel my child needs this, I want this, can she go?
What's important to remember about extended school year is it's not for progress, it's to be able to maintain. So, you know, if she's able to show that she's able to maintain those skills and doesn't have, you know, every student does have trouble with recoupment. So that's why a lot of times in August and September, we're looking at, you know, reteaching some things that the kids learned the year before. But, you know, as far as IDEA, that's a team approach. Everything is a team approach. So now a parent has the right to bring these things to the team to have those discussions. You also have the right to disagree with the team. And at which point you'd be talking about using your procedural safeguards, probably starting with something that, you know, that's not as intense, like mediation. And when you don't agree with the team, this is usually, you know, where we point families is to mediation and or due process, because it is a team approach, and, you know, it's not just the parent saying, I'm demanding this. It's a team saying, okay, we think that the child needs this too, let's provide this. So that, you know, if the district won't agree with the parent, that's why we have the procedural safeguards.
And then once again, you should not be just getting a letter in the mail that excuses you from COVID compensatory services. I think that's a really important thing. I know the state was trying to crack down on that and send out trainings to school districts to explain that they can't just do that. That's not an acceptable practice, that it needs to be discussed in the IEP. I have not seen that come all the way through full circle yet. I'm hoping to see it soon. Okay, keep in mind, we will be sending out an email follow-up with the SurveyMonkey. If you don't take it now, it is sitting right over here in the chat section. If you don't mind taking a couple minutes and taking care of that for us, we would be so appreciative.